I want to give a big thank you to all my patrons, and I'll be doing a Kingsguard roll call after today's video. Welcome back to the Fantasy Network, everyone. My name is, of course, Jimmy Nuts, and today I am thrilled and really just fired up to talk about this self-pub debut novel called The Purple Prince by Sebastien Menkes, which is book one in the River Dream. Self-published fantasy is something that is really exploding. There's a lot of new stuff coming out. This year, I've read more self-pub than I ever have before, and I'll probably be reading a lot more after this because I've been getting a lot of good experiences with it lately. And one of the amazing things whenever it comes to self-published fantasy, we can talk about the fact that sometimes editing is needed and there's not as much money being thrown at these things when it comes to the processes that the traditional publishers have. But one of the amazing thing is, and one of the trade-offs that you get sometimes with self-published fantasy, is the fact that it's an uncompromised vision. It's not about what's commercially viable most of the time, at least, right? This is a place where you can go when you have a story in your heart and that you have passion around it and that you've been imagining for years and years and years. And I feel like that is no more embodied by nothing else, more so than The Purple Prince. And I jumbled my words there because I have a lot of things to say. And first and foremost, I also want to talk about how the fact that when you go to a traditional publisher, and it's your debut novel, like let's say The Purple Prince went to Orbit, there's a good chance that it will have a fancy cover. It'll look pretty neat, but it's going to be like every other book that comes out that year that is a debut. They're not going to put all this money into your promotional material unless it's a big hit and they have something there. The thing that I see here is that this is one of the best books, bindings, everything that I own. I really think it's amazing. Outside of ridiculously expensive editions, The Purple Prince is a beautiful book physically. It is amazing. And the promotional tools that went into this Kickstarter campaign are really impressive. And you know me, I love a good fantasy map. Drop me a comment below if you love fantasy maps. But the Kildarian Empire is separated into many different areas. And I know it's a little bit hard to see this, but this is a beautiful map that I got. Actually, Sebastian sent it to me. So Sebastian, thank you so much. But you have the Astria, Land of Winter. You have Durnheim, Land of Autumn. You have Karhalion, I'm mispronouncing that, the Land of Spring, and then you have Vala, the Land of Summer. Little Valyria vibes there for all my Song of Ice and Fire fans. But this is amazing. And also, on top of that, I also got some of these really cool cards, right? Talking about some of the gods that we're going to see in this book, or at least hear about in this book. And then you have the Durn, Lord of Autumn. You have Nirael, Lady of Winter. You have Nemeth, Shepherd of the Tides. You have Raphael, Prince of Spring. I like this one quite a bit. And then you have Anatsu, Queen of Summer. And Lumion, Mother of Gods. Obviously the big one. And I know you're saying, Jimmy, you're running off the rails here, talking about all this promotional material and all this art and everything. But you can see how much passion was put into this. But none of this means anything unless if the book is good. If the book isn't good, and there's not words in here in a story to back it up with some compelling characters, all this is for naught. But I think it's a bit of a hint that whenever I hold up these cards, there's all this detail given and exactly what the author imagined in the book. And all of these gods and this very detailed map. This self-published fantasy strikes me not just for the cool promotional material, but it strikes me in the fact that it feels very big and ambitious. Multiple POVs from different characters that I'm going to talk about in a little bit, but also the Kildarian Empire itself and this world is breathing. It's real. I feel it. I lived in it for the time that I spent in The Purple Prince. And that is one of the best compliments that I can give a fantasy book. I felt transported to this place, and it swept me away like fantasy is supposed to. When I visit Westeros and Earthsea, those feel like tangible places. And the Kildarian Empire felt that way for me here. And one of the reasons why I loved it so much was the world building and also the mythology. There are influences on Sebastien Menkes as an author. You can tell. Some of them he wears on his sleeve. I like that kind of thing. But there's also a lot of original thought here. Some of it is playing with existing mythology, maybe in our own world as well. But the mythology and the world building made this feel like a pretty unique piece for me, and I think is the strongest piece of this self-published fantasy. And now you're probably wondering, obviously I'm pretty fired up about this. And, we're going to get into some of the things that this book does well and some of the things that I think could be improved on. But I want to tell you what it's about. So this is a land where gods were alive thousands of years ago. I think it's about 1,000 years ago. And they are now gone. And the Kildarian Empire is ruling with an iron fist, stomping out anybody that gets in their path or any of the believers. And meanwhile, the dead are being brought back to life. So they're actually using necromancy to their own ends, which I think is really, really cool. And dreaming is actually something that's frowned upon. Dreaming is dangerous in this world. So it is best if you do not dream. At least that's what the Empire tells you. I think a lot of the fun of this is beginning to kind of unveil the world. But whenever Menkes is dropping, the world building and lets it linger in your brain, you're always wanting more context. So you're kind of peeling back the layers of this onion. And for me, it would become like almost a little seed in my brain. And it would start to grow out. I'd start to wonder about other pieces of this world while I'm still within a very close to the character third person perspective. And that's something that's a lot of fun to play with as an author, I would imagine, is the fact that, just dropping a line or two can get the brain working and then later reaffirming maybe what the reader was able to piece together themselves. I do think that means that this book is a bit methodical within its first part. And it reminds me in some ways of Malice by John Gwynne in just the way that the story is set up. Malice has a very methodical opening, and then it's just all gas, no brakes for the remainder of the series. But and this book is much different than John Gwynne's books, even in writing. But I'm just saying the way that, you have to kind of trust the process here in this first part. And it's more methodical, which is kind of akin to the older fantasy style that I personally really love. And there is technology in this world. There's amazing landscapes and scene setting. And this is where the author's writing, in my opinion, is the strongest. You have Astria, which has cities above in the clouds and a moon road that leads there. Really cool settings in this world, but also some of my favorite dream sequences that I've read in recent memory. And to play on prophetic dreams that I've seen, I would even venture to say that some are pretty horror-esque in a way. And I like the combination of fantasy and horror anytime that it's done, really. And like I said, I think that this and the melding of myth and fantasy and horror is the strength of this story that happens within the world building. I mentioned necromancy a little bit earlier. So the Revenants, which I believe the exact quote, if I have it here, is, "Revenants were profane creatures born of sorcery. The Empire had abused the language of heaven and cheated death. When the gods returned, all revenants would be laid to rest, and all who practice necromancy will face the wrath of heaven." Now that comes from someone's perspective. This is not straight up exposition. This is from a character named Mila. And Mila is a religious follower. She is pious and she is a zealot. And she really wants these gods that were defeated 1,000 years ago to come back. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the characters and talk about what worked and what didn't for me. But Mila is probably my favorite POV in the story. It's probably between her and Benedict, which I'll talk about in a second. But a lot of the world building when it comes to the past and, when it comes to the gods and the really fantastical stuff does seem to happen through Mila's perspective. All of the characters are special in a certain way, but Mila for me stood out as my favorite because I actually believed in her convictions and how religiously extreme she was. And I mentioned Benedict, which I'll call Ben. He is the son of the emperor, and he is the next in line for the throne. But Ben is not somebody that's all that interested in ruling as much as he's interested in another POV character named Raywin. Unfortunately for Ben, he is not betrothed to Raywin, so that makes things a little bit complicated. A little bit of a rocky relationship with his father, which is always fun to explore. And Ben is a good fit for this story because he brings in a lot of that court intrigue, but also on top of that, gives us a different perspective away from, the religious zealotry that we get from Mila. And then we have Raywin, who I think most of the romance kind of revolves around her in this book. And Raywin is growing up, she's coming of age, kind of, and she loves Benedict, but she has some other interesting things going on with other people. I'll let you figure all that out. Raywin is an interesting character because I feel like I can see her growing up, like, before my very eyes in this story. Not that she's super duper young, but she's rash. She changes her mind a lot and sometimes doesn't make perfect sense with the decisions that she makes. But I actually don't think that this is a bad thing in the writing where it's an inconsistency. I think that's just her character. I mean, we know people who just make decisions that seem off the wall and maybe not really the best decision at the end of the day. And Raywing kind of embodies that. I think that she's a great female character and makes Benedict also better because even though she's involved with Benedict, she's involved at a distance. So while she's thinking about Benedict, we start thinking about Ben and we say, oh, I wonder what he is up to. So it kind of links those POVs in a neat way, whereas some of the other POVs are very far away until eventually some convergence happens. And then we have Angelo, which I think for me is the most controversial point of the book, to be honest with you. Angelo is a master assassin, he'll let you know, and he's a fine dressed lad.
I can respect a killer with style.
Well, I too can respect a fine-dressed master assassin. It just also happens to not be my favorite archetype for a character, though a lot of the stuff that Angelo ends up getting into in this book is really, really cool, and I think that seeing him interact with other characters is actually almost more interesting than his character alone. So Angelo, for me, was probably the weakest of the cast, and for one of the reasons why I mentioned that I liked Raywin is that I felt like she was almost, just so brash and constantly making me guess, like, what are you doing, girl? Whereas Angelo, I'm told that he's a master assassin and we see him in his line of work. We do, but we hear about what he loves and what motivates him. And then I feel like he begins to make decisions that are not really congruent with that and not consistent with that. And I think it's to show a change of mind. I think it's to show some growth in this character. But this is one of those things where I feel like maybe it could have had a little bit more time in the oven as far as his development goes, instead of just kind of being introduced, having a display of all of these traits that we're told he has, and then kind of making a left turn. I like where it was going, but I felt like we could have taken more time to get there. So Angelo, for me, was the big thing in the book that didn't really land with me. So I'm very positive about The Purple Prince. Obviously, I definitely recommend it. But I also do want to mention some of the things that, maybe graded me a little bit, or things that I thought could have been done just a little bit better, or, for my subjective taste, it maybe didn't work. Because to be honest with you, like, the well-dressed, edgy assassin sounds cool in theory, but I find myself, and this is, again, subjective as a reader, not usually my favorite type of deal. I actually like assassins that kind of suck. Shout out to my boy Fitz. Yeah, so Angelo was the one where I felt like the characterization maybe just needed a little bit more time, which also brings up to the point that the way the chapters are structured, there are times where you'll get a POV multiple chapters in a row, which is actually pretty nice. I mean, it gives you a nice stopping point as a reader because chapters are, they're kind of ambiguous of what they should be or can be. They're a tool for an author to use. But there were times where I kind of wanted the POVs to be a little bit more mingled. I wanted them to be a little bit more separated, and I wanted to jump around a little bit more. Whereas sometimes you'll spend like 30 pages with one character, maybe 60 pages with one character, and then you'll jump into another one for a short chapter and then get back to it. I'm not confident enough to say that that's a bad thing. I think that, if you take away chapters and you just read it straight through, it's a book, right? But I do wonder if like a developmental editor, maybe, at a bigger firm or whatever, would sit here and say, okay, we can move this around and maybe build some suspense here, or maybe just make the chapters longer, right? Just make big chapters. I know everyone hates long chapters. I don't. I've read Malazan and Robin Hobb, so like long chapters are nothing to me at this point. If you are a fan of piecing things together and you're a fan of picking up on very subtle clues, this is a book for you. This book does so much good foreshadowing and breadcrumbs to lead you to the end, where some of the reveals that happen and some of the twists that happen are actually all perfectly laid out. Some are very obscure details that really enhance the beginning of the book. And then some, when you look back, you're like, I'm dumb for not seeing this. Like, I think you could predict one of the twists in this book if you're really paying attention. So if you're someone who gravitates to stories that take their time and have little details and word choice matters, this is definitely something that you're going to enjoy. When I finished the book and I was talking with a bunch of other people, because a lot of people in my Patreon Discord were reading this at the time, it was a lot of fun for us to go, wait, what? And then some people start pulling out some of the clues. And then also Sebastien Menkes actually, being able to converse with him and talk to him about some of the breadcrumbs that he left. Really, really cool stuff. And it makes me excited, because this is a debut. This is a starting point. And I've already told Sebastien, I've had dialogue with him. I said, you should shop this around. I think he should absolutely shop this story around. You know, multiple POVs, really distinct characters, and I mean, just really what I consider to be great mythology, world building settings. I think that there's a future for this, for sure. And in traditional publishing, obviously I'm not a publisher, I'm not an editor, so what do I really know? But that's just my personal opinion. As a debut, there's a lot of room to grow here. Sebastien Menkes is only going to get better. And if you can enhance some of these things, start playing with more of the characterization, along with the subtle details that lead to really cool payoffs and twists, I think you got something really, really special here. And that's why I'm so fired up. I'm excited. Yeah, like all the promotional stuff is cool. The big map that I have here on my desk was cool, but it's the words in between. And the style of writing really, really worked with me. If you're someone who worries about self-pub with like grammatical errors and things, I am not, the end all be all when it comes to judging grammar. My grammar's pretty poor myself, but I do notice things, right? In self-pub and even some traditionally published books, you do not have to worry about that here. I actually think as far as like the copy editing process, it seems like Sebastien did a fantastic job of going through this and making sure that this was sharp and ready to go, and wanted to take pride in his work. And then you have developmental editing, which I would be very curious to see what this book would look like if it went through a tour or an orbit, and just to see, what you could do with the structure of it to maybe make it a little bit more snappy at times because of the methodical beginning. But all that aside, as a self-published book and the plot that I got and the characters that I got, this was great. I really enjoyed this. This is one of those things that you read and you go, okay, like I got to get into a little bit more self-published fantasy. And like I said, I've read some more this year and they've all been good. But this for me is one of the standouts. This and Season of Albadoon have really brought me into a different lens when I look at self-published fantasy. And I thought that this book was absolutely awesome. I hope you found this review at least somewhat helpful. I know I was ranting a little bit. I had notes on this, but this one was easy to talk about. There's almost too much to talk about with it. And I don't want to give away too many of the details. The plot I left kind of ambiguous just because I would challenge you to get immersed and lost in this world. I think that it could be a big payoff. And I also just want to reiterate that I really enjoyed the writing style here in The Purple Prince. But if you like this review, hit like. If you dislike, you can hit dislike. If you loved it, think about subscribing. I do all types of book reviews here on the channel and have bookish podcasts and all types of things. We're coming up on 10,000 subscribers at this month, and I can't thank you all enough. I really can't. And I never thought I'd be here, and I wouldn't be here without all of you. So thank you so much for being here. Until I see you next time, be good, be safe, and remember to always keep turning the page. And a big thank you to all my patrons, especially my Kingsguard, which include Lauren Henrik, Kai, Simon, Oscar Stewart, Stephen R., Akaika, Amanda R.J. Shaw, Nicoletta Tanner, Jennifer Garrick, Frank C., Evie Fever J., Sarah Pat, Kevin Ryan, Michael Terrence, Wade, Darren, Taylor D., Derry, John C., Boss Machin, Sebastian, Benjamin, Jobot, Noel, Amanda L., Kyle, C. Scott, Steve Talks Books, and Caitlin. Thank you all so much. You're the best.